Welcome to the Have More Fun podcast. In this episode, I talk with Jennifer Fulwiler about doing it all, defining success, and how to pursue your passion while raising a family.
Lord knows a shower was like, that would be like going to Tahiti. I mean, there's no way that was happening. Where they were like, I bet Jen Fulwiler has help. You know she has help. They were talking about it like I was dealing crack cocaine. And I was reading this and thinking, we have got to change this culture. We have a few hours in the evening between dinner and late in the evening when we tell the kids they can't do screens. And of course, they always act like they're dying. I mean, every night, it's like a surprise to them that we have this nightly screens off time.
Theodore Roosevelt was a man who knew who he was. And one thing he was determined to enjoy himself. As a freshman in college, he wrote his mother a letter, and in it he said, "It seems perfectly wonderful in looking back over my 18 years of existence to see how I have literally never spent an unhappy day, unless by my own fault." Years after that, he famously said, "The joy of living is his who has the heart to demand it." Roosevelt believed this with his whole being and lived it with determined steadfastness decade after decade, writing at the end of his presidency saying, "I have had the best time of any man of my age in all the world. I have enjoyed myself in the White House more than I have ever known any other president to enjoy himself." Theodore Roosevelt was tough and tender, wise and fun. He lived out his passions and prioritized his family, all of which is evidenced by some unusual facts you might not know about him. Roosevelt made family and fun a priority. In the spring of 1903, Roosevelt's 9-year-old son Archie, who was the fifth of his 6 children, was recovering from the measles. Earlier that year, Archie had received a Shetland pony from the Secretary of the Interior, Ethan Allen Hitchcock, as a gift. Archie named him Algonquin, measuring 33 inches in height at his withers and weighing in at 350 pounds. Algonquin was described by the Washington Post as iron gray with spots and compactly built with a round barrel, small ears, clean pony face, and stocky limbs. The reporter then went on to say that Algonquin is a very good-natured, though spirited little beast. One day, having been confined to his bed for weeks recovering from the measles, Archie asked his mother if he could visit Algonquin. After deciding he wasn't strong enough to venture out to the stable, a different plan was hatched. They decided to bring the pony to the boy by walking Algonquin into the White House, squeezing him into an elevator, and taking him to Archie's bedroom that was on the 2nd floor. Archie shouted with joy, and Algonquin had an adventure that no other pony has ever had, because family and fun were prioritized in the White House during Roosevelt's term. Theodore Roosevelt was also a total badass. In 1912, he gave a stirring campaign speech after being shot moments earlier. Teddy was a popular president throughout his 2 terms in office, which lasted from 1901 to 1909, but not everyone loved him. On October 14, 1912, he was scheduled to deliver a speech to a crowd in Milwaukee. Unfortunately, he encountered some trouble as he was greeting his supporters on his way to the podium. A saloon owner named John Shrink approached Teddy, drew a pistol, and shot the former president in the chest. It would have surely been a fatal wound were it not for Teddy's crumpled up, handwritten speech that was tucked in the breast pocket of his shirt. The document thwarted the bullet, and Teddy only suffered a flesh wound. With the bullet fragment still lodged in his torso, Teddy took the stage and delivered a rousing speech that lasted for nearly an hour. After he stepped down from the stage woozy from blood loss, he was rushed to a nearby hospital and treated for the wound. And then he hopped back out onto the campaign trail because nothing would stop Roosevelt from pursuing his mission. One of my very favorite facts about Teddy Roosevelt is that he regularly went skinny dipping in the Potomac. During his presidency, the noted outdoorsman often escaped the confines of the White House by sailing his presidential yacht on the Potomac and led hiking expeditions in Rock Creek Park. Regularly, after a strenuous walk along the Potomac, the president was known to shed all of his clothes and take a plunge in the river to cool off. Yet another reason that Theodore Roosevelt is my spirit animal. And in addition to all of this, he was a trendsetter. Roosevelt was the first president to refer to the presidential mansion as the White House, the first president to host a black man at a White House dinner, the first to appoint a Jewish person as a cabinet member. He was also the first president to travel outside the United States and fly in an airplane. And he was also the first American to win a Nobel Peace Prize in 1906. Teddy Roosevelt lived fully and didn't worry too much about what anyone else thought about it, because he was determined to live a beautiful life, which is the same thing my guest today is determined to do. Jennifer Fulwiler is a mom of 6 who hosts her own 2-hour radio show every day to relax, as she says. You can listen to it on Sirius XM channel 129. She also has a book out titled One Beautiful Dream, where she talks about following her passions while still putting her family first, just like Theodore Roosevelt. And without further ado, here is my friend, Jennifer Fulwiler. So in your new book, One Beautiful Dream, you talk about how pursuing our passions, loving our family, and saying goodbye to guilt is possible. Will you teach us your ways? What are your best ideas for navigating it all?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. And it's really the reason I wrote the book. And let me answer by giving you an analogy that I share in the book of, I was really struggling with this, that on the one hand, it felt meant to be that I would do this work that I loved. In my case, it was writing. It just felt so right and good and like something I was supposed to do. But then, of course, being a good mother to my children, a good wife to my husband, I mean, that all felt right and good too. And I was just freaking out, like, how do I reconcile these two things? I don't have peace with the idea of shutting down these opportunities I've had to do this work that I love so much. And I ended up talking to this wonderful guy, this priest, and he actually grew up in Pakistan, came from this totally different culture. And he said, why aren't you thinking of doing all this with your family? He said, you're thinking like a soloist, someone who's like one guy up on the stage playing the cello or something, like all alone. He said, why don't you think of yourself as being part of an orchestra? And, in an orchestra, everyone comes together to use their talents to create something that is greater than any one individual. And when you're playing, like, let's say you're playing a symphony in an orchestra, there are going to be moments when you put down your own instrument. It's not your time to play. And then there are times when someone else puts down their instrument and you kind of have the solo. That's what it takes to create a beautiful symphony. And that's how he encouraged me to see my work. He said, yeah, follow your passions, follow your dreams, but do it with your family. See yourselves as a team. And yes, that will involve sacrifice. It might mean that you can't take every single opportunity that comes your way. But you'll find that when your whole family comes together to support one another in following your dreams and following your passions, you end up creating a symphony. You end up creating something even more big and beautiful than just a solo act.
So good. In your book, you talk about how often the life you need is not the life you would have originally chosen for yourself. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that my life is so different than what I would have originally chosen, because when I was in my early 20s out of college, I just assumed that happiness and fulfillment was going to be found in my career and just being a fully independent person. I didn't even want to get married, let alone have kids. I mean, I assumed that the path to happiness was totally doing my own thing. And then I just got sent on this wild journey. I ended up having 6 babies in 8 years, and I'm an only child. My husband is an only child. I mean, we are both like, we are just the blind leading the blind when it comes to family life. So the life I'm living now as a homeschooling mom of 6 kids is not for a second the life I would have planned for myself. But yeah, that's something I share in One Beautiful Dream as well, that it's the life I needed, even if it wasn't the life I would have planned.
Love it. And I love how you say that in our culture, there's no parenting decision so insignificant that it won't be debated on blogs and discussed on news programs and argued about on Facebook. And there's a quote where you said, don't get sucked into that. That time you spent wondering if you're a bad parent because you didn't put sunscreen on your kids' elbows before that trip to the park is 15 seconds out of your life that you can never get back. And I keep thinking about this idea Because I think that so often in our culture, we're overfed and undernourished, right? Like we have so much access to information. And sometimes it's just helpful, like to put the blogs away and to start trusting our gut a little more. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Mandy, totally. 100%. I think that is so important. And, one of the things that led me to this realization was when I spoke to my grandfather and some other people of his generation. And I realized that, Mandy, when your great grandmother and my great grandmother raised children, I don't think they struggled with all this as much as we did, because they didn't have Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and, all of these opinions. And the other thing is they had very strong family traditions that were handed down to them about how to raise kids. And my grandfather was born in 1914. God rest his soul. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he lived to a very, very old age. So I got the benefit of hearing how life was different for previous generations. And one of the things I realized is like our ancestors did not struggle with their parenting decisions nearly as much as we did, because they had these really close connections to the parenting traditions of their families. And this wasn't always a good thing. I mean, I think sometimes people had some crazy ideas about parenting, but for better or worse, they did not agonize about it. It was like, this is how you raise your kids. That's that. You take them to church on Sundays, have them work on the farm. I mean, it was really quite a simple thing. But now, we've really kind of lost a connection to our family traditions about raising kids. We're surrounded by opinions on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And, Mandy, I don't think that parents were meant to have as many choices as we do. I mean, there are entire books written about the concept of decision fatigue, that we only have a certain amount of energy in any given day to make decisions. It is finite. It is not infinite. And so I think the same thing applies to parenting, that it is just exhausting that we have to agonize about, oh, what sunscreen did I put on my kids? Is that bottle I let my baby use, does it have the wrong kind of plastic in it? Should I even be using a bottle at all? What fabric are my kids' clothes made out of? Let me just tell you, my mother, my grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, they did not stress out about this stuff. And it is exhausting, this culture where like a good mother is supposed to agonize about every single decision she ever makes with her kids. I think we need to really boldly reject that and say, look, I've made my choices. I've made my decisions about the best way to raise my kids, and I'm not going to let Facebook and Instagram sway my decisions.
Thank you for saying that. That is so freeing and something that all of us need to hear. Oh my gosh. Another thing that you said, and I'm not sure if it was in your book or on your blog, but you talk about that you've learned in raising kids that it's not always possible, but if you can make it a habit of getting up an hour before everyone else, it will change your life. Tell us how that's changed your life.
Yes. And you know what, Mandy? I wrote that on my blog. And I think this is exactly the kind of advice that changes by seasons. So right now I'm in a little bit of a different season than when I wrote that advice. And I'll tell you about that in a second. But in that season, I was staying home with kids. And I found that every day I was waking up, I would sleep till the last possible minute. And, having 6 babies in 8 years, I mean, there was a time when I had, I had 4 children under age 5. And I think that is when I wrote the post you're referring to. And so what I would find is I would wake up, the kids were, coming in my room, they were awake before me. And I had this feeling of what my husband calls being behind the curve. So my husband is an MBA. So he's like a businessy guy and he always thinks in business terms. And one time he said to me, he said, look, Jen, you're living your life behind the curve. Like imagine if a CEO were to walk into his company every day after all of the employees were already there, the day had already started, your house is, in this case, like the CEO with his business, it's just out of control. It's chaos. And it's really hard for him to rein that chaos back in, once the day has already started. And so he said, that's why CEOs have a reputation for always being the first one in the office so that they can set the tone, they can have everything ready. And they're just, as he says, ahead of the curve. And when I thought of that analogy, of the CEO like rolling up hours after the employees are already there, I thought, yeah, that wouldn't work very well in a business. But that's basically what I'm doing in my house, I also realized, Mandy, that I didn't have time for things like self-care. I mean, honestly, brushing my teeth was usually a victory because I had these little kids running around. Somebody needed a diaper change. I mean, Lord knows a shower was like, that would be like going to Tahiti. I mean, there's no way that was happening. And so what I found is if I sacrificed a little bit of sleep so that I could get up, have some quiet moments, maybe for prayer or just brushing my hair, maybe even putting on a little bit of makeup and just thinking through the day. What do we want to do today? What's important today? What is my plan? And of course, my plans would usually fall apart, but just having that vision, I just felt so much more on top of my life. And so I found that that was absolutely life-changing. Now, Mandy, I'm in a little bit of a different season. Now that I have this radio show, I have a babysitter who comes every day, and I'm very open about that. I have tons of help. That is how I do it. If people are asking the questions, I'm really big on the idea that women should be unapologetic about asking for help and making it happen in their lives when they need it. So now I actually go to a studio, to an office to do my radio show, and my babysitter comes and she kind of gets the house running. And so what I do in the morning, I have a little bit of a different routine than I used to. But I think the overall lesson is find the lifestyle, find the system and the habits that are going to work for this season of your life. And so what your friend is doing, what your sister is doing, what your cousin is doing, that might not be the right system for you because maybe they have older kids or maybe they only have babies and you have some older kids. You know, you have to look at what works for your life today, right now, and not what works for someone else's life.
I loved how you talked about asking for help or asking for what we need. And a therapist friend of mine once said that healthy people ask for what they want or healthy people ask for what they need.
Yep.
And I think so often as moms who are also working and pursuing passions, it's really hard to ask for help. How do you manage just kind of getting over it? I love how you're just like, yeah, I have a lot of help and that's how I can do it all. So how do you get to that point?
Yeah, Mandy. So first of all, I will say I saw there was an online forum where people were talking about me, and it wasn't necessarily a positive thing. It was some people who didn't like me, and they were talking about me. And one of the discussions was you could hear, almost imagine this sort of whispering voice where they were like, I bet Jen Fulwiler has help. You know she has help. They were talking about it like I was dealing crack cocaine. And I was reading this and thinking, we have got to change this culture among mothers, like that having help is this dirty word. Like if you, again, going back to looking at what the generations of women before us had, women never had to be completely on duty with their children 24/7. Women always had help in some form or another. You know, I was an anthropology major for a while in college. And one of the things I noticed is that women always raised kids going back, 1,000, 2,000 years ago in villages, like in tribes where you would have, like, your sister lived just, a half mile away and her kids would run around and you'd have nieces and nephews to play with your little kids. And even in more recent eras, my grandfather grew up on a farm and he said his mother never saw them during the days. They would run around the farm. They would go down to the pond. She did not have to play entertainment director for her children 24/7. And even my mom, she grew up in the 1950s and 60s in the suburbs. But, this was back when her mom would say, go outside. I'm locking the door. All of you guys have to go outside, come back for dinner when the street lights come on. And so, all of these women in all of these previous generations, they had some form of help, whether it was a community that lived nearby or just the ability to lock their kids outside for hours at a time. And so one of the messages that I really hope that One Beautiful Dream gets across to women is that, hey, if it feels hard raising your kids, if it feels like your life is harder than it should be, if it feels like you're struggling, let me just tell you, the problem is not you. You are living in a really unnatural situation in that you have to have eyes on your children 24/7. You have to be entertainment director for them. That is not a natural way to live. And so that's why I always tell women, yeah, you've got to get out there and ask for help and seek help. And, we would find babysitters maybe for like $8, $10 an hour. Just a lot of homeschool communities have daughters who are available during the day and, who would love to help. So we found some of those girls, and we would take money out of even our grocery budget and say, okay, we're not going to get, the steak this week, or we're not going to get, this or that, so that we can have a little money so that I can have one of these girls come and be an extra pair of hands for me, just a few hours a week, whatever we can afford. But Mandy, that was really hard because I still had that mom guilt that I absorbed from the world around us that said, oh, good moms do it all by themselves. Good moms don't ask for help. And I'll be the first to admit, it has been a real journey for me to just accept, both for myself and publicly, yes, no, I can't do this alone. Nobody can. I have a lot of help in a lot of different forms, and I'm not ashamed of that.
So good. I feel like so many of us can benefit from such wise advice. So thank you. I love how you titled your book, One Beautiful Dream. And it comes from a quote by St. Francis of Rome. And you talked about that quote, but then you used it to define your idea of success and achievement. Will you share a little bit about how that quote shapes the choices you make?
Yeah, I love that quote. It jumped out to me a long time ago when I read of this woman. She lived in something like the 1300s in Rome. And she had an interesting story in that she had this idea that she was going to be this like nun praying in the convent 24/7. That was her temperament. She was a super introvert. And so she just had this idea that I am going to live a life of reading and prayer and contemplation. And that's going to be the thing. Well, her life did not turn out that way. She ended up getting married. She ended up having children. But she threw herself into this life, even though it wasn't always the perfect fit for her temperament. And even though it wasn't what she planned, she realized this was what she was meant to do. And she loved her husband and she loved her children. And at the end of her husband's life, he turned to her and he said, I feel like my life has been one beautiful dream of purest happiness, thanks to your love. And so he basically said that, like, my whole life has just been this beautiful dream, and it's all thanks to the love that you have shown me. And I realized when I read that, that is all we will care about at the end of the day. When we come to the end of our own time on earth, when we look back at what we did, what really matters, what really sticks with us is the love we received and we shared with others. And so that has always been, that has become my guiding principle for anything I do. And that's also why I called the book One Beautiful Dream after that quote. And I like the word too, because dream can have two different meanings. One is dream like you're asleep, like it doesn't feel real, like you're dreaming this. But the second is dream like a goal, and I had this goal that I'm trying to hit, launch my writing career in this book. So I also kind of liked the double meaning of dream, both as a goal and as something that feels kind of surreal.
Oh my gosh. That's the kind of legacy I feel like we all want. How beautiful is that?
Yeah.
So I was really, really moved by a story that you shared about being open to moments that we don't expect. Will you share the story of the neighborhood kids ringing your doorbell and the injured bird and the unlikely friendship that ensued? Because I think so much of motherhood is unexpected opportunities to say yes.
Yes. Okay. I love that story. And Mandy, I also have a great follow-up for you that is not in the book. So I'll tell you the story, and then I'll tell you the follow-up that I haven't even shared it publicly anywhere. So this will be fun. So I was trying to do this writing work, and this was for my first book that I wrote that came out in 2014. But this is what I was trying to work on. I had a contract with an agent, and it just felt like, oh, this is important. I really want to get this book done. But these neighbor kids kept playing Ding Dong Ditch. A lot of people probably know that game where someone rings your doorbell and runs. And I really developed a hatred for these kids because I was like, this work is important and I never get time to myself. And I would be working during my kids' nap time. But then when these kids would come ring my doorbell, they'd wake up my children and it would, it would demolish my writing time. And I was so infuriated. And one day I was looking at them as they ran off, and I felt this, I don't know, it's hard to explain. Like, it just felt like a God thing that I just felt like I was supposed to connect with them. Like, it was meant to be that these kids were on my doorstep, ringing my doorbell. And so I felt this movement like, oh my gosh, I'm meant to let them in. They're being sent to my door for a reason. And then I was like, to heck with that. And I actually disconnected the doorbell. I was like, nope, no kids are going to be sent to my front porch. I have enough kids to deal with over here. Don't want to deal with them. And so I was really trying to reject that message. I felt that I was meant to connect with them. And then one day I found an injured bird on my front yard, and I had all toddlers and babies at this time, and they were going crazy. And it just so happened that these same ding dong ditch kids were walking by right when I'm trying to help this bird. And so I called them in to help. And long story short, it turns out that, these kids, they had these single mothers who were working really hard to provide for them, but, weren't able to be home when they got home from school, and they were just looking for something to do. And I actually invited them in. I served them tea on our finest china, and I gave them snacks. And I had this moment of realizing, yeah, it's cool to follow my passions and to do this writing work. And that is important. But sharing love with the people who are sent into my life, that's important too. This is not an either or thing. And I realized that maybe that was the most important way that I would spend my time, this day, with sharing it with these girls who, just they wanted a place to hang out. They wanted something to do. And so it was really a beautiful moment. One of the girls was like, Miss Jen, can we all be BFFs? Which was just so cute. And what's amazing, and I do talk about this in the book, is they ended up being a huge help to me. They started coming over all the time, and they would offer to babysit my kids for free. And I ended up really being able to do more of the work that I was trying to do because I accepted them into my life. And, Mandy, I look at it like, in a way, I think God was sort of trying to answer my prayer for help. At the time, I couldn't afford babysitting. And so I was praying like, oh gosh, how could I ever have help? How could this ever come to be? And then when I was rejecting these girls ringing my doorbell, it was like God was trying to answer my prayer, but I was rejecting it. So, this went on. They were a big help to me. And, they were a key reason that I was able to launch my writing career during this time. And then here's the follow-up that is just, it's such a fun story. So one of these girls ended up becoming a young mother at age 19. She was maybe, I don't want to speculate, maybe a little caught off guard by that situation. So now she has a baby, and we are able to support her. She'll text me sometimes and say, hey, can you watch the baby? I really need to go do something. And she'll drop off the baby with my babysitter, or I'll help the neighbor when the baby's at a neighbor's house. And it's so beautiful to see that we are now able to pay it forward. The circle is continuing now that she has a baby. And Mandy, it all started with her and her friends playing ding dong ditch at my front door when they were like 11 years old.
Oh my gosh, I have goosebumps. What a cool full circle story.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Okay, one of my favorite questions to ask my friends is, what is the best advice you never got?
Oh, I love that. Oh, I love, love, love that. What is the best advice you never got? Okay, I know my answer. It is this. Accept both the good and the bad parts of your just natural temperament. Now, here's what I mean by that. So I am the kind of person, I was actually talking about this on Instagram a while back. A lot of people were saying, oh my gosh, Jen, you have this book coming out. Now you're doing a book tour. Your radio show is 2 hours a day, every day. You homeschool, you've got these 6 kids, like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I saw a couple of my friends on Instagram were saying, gosh, I guess I need to be doing what Jen's doing. Like, oh, I was feeling good that I unloaded the dishwasher today. And she's announcing her book tour, and she's doing this and she's doing that. And so I was just getting real with people on there. And I went on, the Instagram stories thing. And I said, look, you guys know that I am a workaholic, right? Like, that is my temperament. I mean, that is just the way that I am wired. It is easier for me to be hitting some really big deadline, working 80 hours a week, crunching numbers on my computer, than it is for me to do one glitter craft with my children. Like, I have this workaholic's temperament. And so here's where I really get into the answer to your question, Mandy. For so many years, for probably most of the time that I have been a parent, my oldest is 13. So I've been a parent for 13 years. And all of this time, I just assumed that my workaholic type temperament was bad, that everything is bad about it. Because I follow people, I see the Pinterest and the Instagram where a lot of people in my circles, a lot of women are like, I choose to live a quiet life. I have my quiet mornings where I'm sipping my coffee and gazing out the window, and that works great for them. But so therefore I assumed I have to be exactly like that woman. And it's really bad. It says something terrible about me that I thrive under deadlines. And frankly, when I don't have deadline pressure going on in my life, honestly, Mandy, I kind of get depressed. Like I don't do well when I am not under pressure. So I always assumed that this was this terrible, terrible thing about me because I'm not like other people. And then I realized, maybe this is okay. Like certainly I do need to watch out for workaholic tendencies. Certainly I can, with any temperament, I can go into bad territory with that. But it's ultimately a good thing. There's something I can use there. It's how I was able to write this book and do this radio show. You can harness whatever is in your temperament for good. And, I kind of wish I'd realized that sooner rather than spending so many years beating myself up for, what I thought was a bad part of my personality. And I have a friend who points out that people's worst qualities are also their best qualities. And so here to put it in a nutshell, here is the advice that I never got, the best advice that I never got. And it is just remember that people's worst qualities are also their best qualities. And so I would encourage everyone listening to take that personality trait that you always beat yourself up for. Maybe you feel like you're lazy, or maybe like me, you feel like you're a workaholic, whatever it is, something that you beat yourself up for. Maybe you're too much of a neat freak. You're always fussing at your kids and your husband about the house. Now find the positive flip side of that. What is the positive there that you can use to make the world a better place? To give you just one example that's different from my own, a friend of mine always beats herself up about being lazy. She calls herself lazy all the time. But she realized when she looked at the positive flip side of that she's this wonderfully laid back person who adds this air of calmness to any group that she's in. Like she calms me down when I'm in one of my workaholic frenzies. And she realized there's actually something really positive on the flip side of that. So that's what I encourage everyone to do. Take that personality trait that you always beat yourself up for and look at what is the positive flip side of that same personality trait.
Love it. You are such a gift to women. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
I have one last question for you. And it is, how do you cultivate more fun in your life?
Oh, I love that. Okay. How I cultivate more fun. For me, the key there has been two things. One, to let go of perfectionism, because, I used to try to have more fun by saying, oh, I'm going to bake a cake with the kids this weekend because that's what I saw someone doing on Pinterest. And then I would end up twitching and screaming and covered in flour and, just realizing that I do not have the gifts that it takes to bake with children. It's just not something I can do. And so I used to, I think, set the bar too high. I would try to be quote unquote having fun straight out of Pinterest. And now, Mandy, I realized that honestly, the most fun we ever have is like yesterday. I came home after my show. I came back from the studio and we just hung out back and the kids were just running around the backyard. And I was just drinking lemonade, watching them run around the backyard. And I realized this is great. This is enough. This is fun. I don't have to have like decorative appetizers set out and streamers and decorations. And, if that kind of thing is fun for you, absolutely do it. But don't put all of these obligations on yourself for what having fun should look like. So that was the first thing. And the second thing is just having set times on my calendar that are just part of the routine where we are not working and, we're not doing screens. And it's just time for us to, frankly, sometimes even just be bored together. There's nothing on the calendar. So for example, I try, I'm not perfect about this. I try not to do any work on Sundays. We try to do the traditional Sunday is a day of rest thing. We have a few hours in the evening between dinner and late in the evening when we tell the kids they can't do screens. And of course, they always act like they're dying. I mean, every night it's like a surprise to them that we have this nightly screens off time. But I think that allows us to have spontaneous fun. The fact that these are certain hours out of each week and once on the weekend when we don't have work commitments, we don't have screens on, we try not to schedule activities during that time. And it's amazing what, all sorts of spontaneous fun that can happen during times like that.
I love it. I'm a huge fan of boredom.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think we need to rediscover the art of being bored as a family.
Yes. Jennifer, thank you so much. It has been such a treat. I loved One Beautiful Dream, and I think it is an anthem for women everywhere. So thank you for writing it.
Oh, I'm so blessed to hear that. Thank you so much, Mandy. It really means a lot.
Hey there. Thanks so much for listening today. I want to invite you to join me in Louisville, Kentucky, September 20th through the 22nd for MomCon. It is the largest gathering of moms around the world, and it is the most fun you will have in one weekend. We are going to dance. We're going to talk about all sorts of crazy and amazing things, and we're going to have some really fun special guests that you want to meet and get your picture taken with. And I would love to see you there, so go to momcon.mops.org to register. Now go out and have an adventure, and don't come back until you do.